If you've ever loved a bike but wish it had just 7 millimeters more travel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, everybody. Welcome. Today we are going to be reviewing the Fezzari Delano Peak. And guess what? We love this bike, but we took it from 135 millimeters of travel to 142 millimeters of travel, and we're going to tell you how that you can do the same thing to your Delano Peak. So the Fezzari Delano Peak is available in a variety of price points. If you're familiar with Fezzari, then you know you get a lot of bike for the money. We're testing the comp version, which retails for $44.99. Has a 12-speed Shimano XT drivetrain, XT brakes, Fox 36 Grip 2 fork, and it came with a Fox DPX2 rear shock. Spent a lot of time on this bike. You might remember last summer, right when it released, we were lucky enough to get one a little bit early and conducted an in-depth dissected review, or dissected video, I should say, on this bike, and we're very impressed right out of the get-go. Since then, the bike has been passed around to a lot of people. I recently took it on my Thanksgiving trip across the country and put a lot of miles and abuse and beat down on this poor little bike. And it's still here, and it's still in one piece, and we're still loving it. So one of the things that I did notice some of the other riders also felt was, even though this bike is super fun and playful, they wish it had just a little bit more travel, because it's so fun and playful that we found ourselves pushing the limits of that bike, getting out into some rougher, gnarlier, rockier terrain than, you know, maybe it was intended for. I don't quite know about that, because these guys kind of build their bikes to be pretty burly. So nevertheless, when we reached out to Tyler Cloward at Fezzari, he unofficially hinted at the fact that if we had an extra 210 by 55 millimeter metric shock laying around, we might be able to modify our bike just a little bit. And thanks to his help and pointers, we were able to give this bike 142 mil of rear travel. He also commented that maybe going up to a 160 fork could be a lot of fun. We haven't done that. We've actually been pretty happy with the 150, although a nicer factory edition fork could be a little bit better, but probably more likely than not, we just need to service this thing because it's got a lot of hours on it. So after making the change over to that rear shock, the improvements we felt were definitely notable. One, it was a fresh shock versus a pretty old shock that was in need of service. So just a reminder, give your shocks some love. They do a lot of work, so it'll make your bike ride better longer. So once we got that though, the fresh shock helped a lot. The extra travel helps quite a bit. Now the TetraLink suspension on the Fezzaris, it requires a little bit higher pressure and a little bit more force and air right off that top to kind of get activated and move, but it's surprisingly still pretty good when you get on kind of like what you see here, really rocky, sharp terrain. I spent a lot of time riding that stuff in Utah on my trip, and obviously here in Central Oregon, we've got a lot of sharp rocks. So it was very cool to see that this design worked well on some of those chattery, rocky bumps where we felt that it was a little bit weak. Even though Fezzari says it's pretty progressive, obviously we're aware that, you know, brands have to tune to meet a wide variety of riders and weights, but we just felt it was a little bit too linear at the very end of the travel. It supported great in the middle of the travel. It was very poppy. This bike is super fun, playful. It pops out of corners, off of lips, rocks, whatever. But going off of drops to flat, it was definitely bottoming out quite a bit. So we added some volume reducers, which helped. And then when we went up to that 142 millimeters of travel and the longer or bigger shock, it definitely helped. So if you are a heavier rider, if you're a rider that does a lot of drops or big compressions, you may want to consider extra volume reducers or doing this shock upgrade as it helped quite a bit. Now, getting into the geometry of this bike, I've got no doubt that's another major component as to why our team loved this thing so much. It's a size large with a 480 millimeter reach, has a 65-degree head tube angle, and a 77.5-degree seat tube angle. So it's pretty balanced, right? Like, I mean, it's definitely not radical. It's not overly long. If you've watched our videos, you know that we're not necessarily like on the bandwagon of like this super long, super slack bike, as we think a lot more riders are gonna benefit from something that's a lot more versatile, a lot more well-rounded, and will make 80 or 90% of your ride a lot more fun than these big long limos that might make like that 10% of your ride better. Another thing that we really liked about this bike is the stiffness. It is really stiff, like especially for a 135 bike, it is unbelievable. Like the rear end, which kind of took us some getting used to, the seat stays. I'm sure that's got a lot to do with the stiffness, but I don't love the way those seat stays look. Also, if you notice, like I did have some issues with pulling up this chainstay protector with my heel, and you can see quite a bit of rub down there. So the way they flare out, I was having some issues. Oddly enough, it was more on the right side than the left, so I'm sure that has to do with my feet and pedaling position, but that's one thing I think it should be addressed, maybe getting something that's either a little slimmer profile or a little better adhesive down there. Another minor critique I've got is the handlebar spec. I'm not personally a big fan of the race face bars. The grips aren't my favorite. I do like some of the ergon grips. These just don't happen to be one of them, but I feel like these handlebars transfer a lot of vibration. So not a huge fan of that. Again, that's personal preference and fairly easily remedied, especially when you're spending, you know, $44.99 on a pretty sweet bike. You know, that leaves you a little bit of money to customize grips and handlebars and saddle, pedal, whatever you might want to do. So obviously we've talked a lot about how much we like this bike. We have not been paid by Fezzari. They have not given us this bike to keep. We are just borrowing it for the time being, but I think there's just something to be said about getting on a bike that's 4,500 bucks, has a lifetime warranty, has a full, you know, 23-point like custom fit system on the website. You can call them and ask any questions. You can modify the build through their build program. They really offer a lot, and it's hard to not be excited about it because, you know, we test a lot of really expensive bikes and they are awesome and we love them. But the reality is, if we weren't getting these really fancy bikes to test, we'd have a hard time justifying spending 8, 9, 10 grand on a mountain bike. And the reality is we'd probably be in this $300 to $4,500 range. And so when we can get on bikes that cost that much and have a blast and keep up with bikes that cost twice as much, it gets us pretty pumped. So, you know, we gotta say, like, major props to Fezzari and the other brands that are trying to keep prices affordable and still keep performance at a really high level. So, yeah, aside from, like I said, some minor critiques, the thing blows through the travel a little bit on drops. I don't love the look of that seat stay. I have some heel rub issues. I don't love the handlebar spec. Other than that, guys, I mean, there's not a whole lot to really pick on with this bike. So it's a solid machine. If you guys have seen the videos over the summer, we've spent a lot of time riding it, and you know, we've got a garage full of bikes, so this thing's getting used for a reason, and that's genuinely because we enjoy riding it. Props again to Fezzari for really knocking it out of the park with the Delano Peak. This is a killer bike. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for lots more reviews. We hope to see you guys out on the trails. Thanks for watching.